Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast, Political Ideologies. And as I turned the first few pages, I stumbled upon something unexpected. A quote, standing alone. It was from a philosopher I had never encountered before, Umberto Eco. I have come to believe that the whole world is an enigma, a harmless enigma that is made terrible by our own mad attempt to interpret it as though it had an underlying truth. The words struck me instantly, not just for their prominence, but for what they implied. Here was a book devoted to categorizing, dissecting, and defining political ideologies, yet it opened with a passage that threatened to unravel everything that followed. The world, at its core, remains an enigma, neither malicious nor benevolent, simply an intricate puzzle beyond immediate comprehension. Yet, this enigma, harmless in itself, becomes formidable when subjected to humanity's relentless impulse to distill it into rigid interpretations. The mind, uncomfortable with uncertainty, seeks patterns where chaos reigns, imposing order where ambiguity might be the more natural state. Eco's assertion challenges a deeply ingrained human tendency, the pursuit of ultimate truths. The world, as he describes it, does not threaten us through its mystery. Rather, our fear stems from our own refusal to accept that some questions lack definitive answers. This compulsive search for meaning, while driving intellectual and scientific progress, has also fostered ideological dogmas, rigid worldviews, and conflicts born from clashing certainties. The paradox he presents is compelling. The enigma is not inherently dangerous, yet our attempt to decode it, our insistence on extracting a singular, absolute truth, renders it terrifying. This suggests that the terror is of our own making, a product of the discomfort that arises when we confront an existence that resists clear categorization. Throughout history, societies have oscillated between embracing ambiguity and recoiling from it. The Renaissance, with its revival of classical skepticism and inquiry, stood in stark contrast to the rigid theological certainties of the medieval period. Similarly, modern quantum physics, which acknowledges the probabilistic nature of reality, starkly opposes the deterministic framework of classical mechanics. Each era's intellectual struggle mirrors Eco's insight. The world is not inherently terrifying, but our need for control, for an overarching truth, leads to fear, suppression, and at times violence. Even in personal life, this phenomenon is evident. Consider how individuals construct narratives about themselves, seeking coherence in a past that is often fragmented and contradictory. Memory itself is an unreliable narrator, prone to distortion and reinterpretation. Yet, the desire to impose a single, unshakable identity upon oneself often leads to crises when reality does not align with the constructed story. In a sense, Eco's words apply not just to grand philosophical or societal inquiries, but to the very nature of self-perception. The implications of Eco's observation extend beyond philosophy and history. They touch on psychology, literature, politics, and even artificial intelligence. In literature, the greatest works often leave room for ambiguity, inviting multiple interpretations rather than enforcing a singular moral or message. In politics, authoritarian regimes thrive on the promise of absolute truths, while democracies at their best acknowledge the necessity of pluralism and debate. In AI, the pursuit of machine-based truth and knowledge echoes humanity's own historical struggle to define reality, raising questions about whether intelligence, human or artificial, can ever escape the trap of imposed meaning. Eco's perspective aligns with postmodernist thought, particularly in its critique of meta-narratives, the grand, all-encompassing explanations that civilizations construct to make sense of their existence. Thinkers like Derrida and Foucault similarly warned against the dangers of fixed interpretations, advocating instead for an ongoing process of deconstruction, a willingness to challenge one's own assumptions continuously. If we take Eco's insight seriously, the logical conclusion is not nihilism or a rejection of meaning itself, but rather an embrace of intellectual humility. The lesson is not that interpretation is futile, but that rigid certainty is the true danger. Meaning, in this view, is fluid, something to be explored, debated, and reimagined rather than seized and locked away. If we embrace Eco's perspective fully, we arrive at a liberating, if unsettling, realization. Uncertainty is not a flaw in our understanding, but an essential feature of existence. Instead of fearing ambiguity, We might view it as a space for creative engagement, a landscape where ideas are tested, dismantled, and rebuilt in endless configurations. This has profound implications for how we approach knowledge. In education, for example, traditional models often prioritize memorization of fixed truths over the cultivation of critical inquiry. Students are trained to seek correct answers rather than to navigate complexity. Yet, the most profound intellectual breakthroughs emerge not from certainty, but from curiosity, when scientists, philosophers, and artists entertain the possibility that they might be wrong. The history of science itself is a testament to this. Theories once deemed absolute, Newtonian mechanics, the geocentric universe phrenology, were later revised, expanded, or discarded entirely. If the pursuit of truth is, Eco suggests, both necessary and dangerous, then the wisest course may be to approach it with flexibility rather than dogma. This flexibility is equally crucial in social and political spheres. Much of modern political discourse suffers from a rigid, binary approach, left versus right, progress versus tradition, science versus belief, when reality is rarely so neatly divided. In an age of algorithm-driven echo chambers where information is curated to reinforce existing biases, Eco's insight serves as a warning. When we treat our personal or ideological narratives as unshakable truths, we turn the enigma of the world into something terrible, not because of what it is, but because of what we project onto it. Literature, particularly in its postmodern and absurdist forms, has long explored this theme. In Franz Kafka's works, for instance, protagonists struggle against opaque systems that offer no clear answers. The terror in the trial or the castle does not come from an explicitly malevolent force, but from the protagonist's futile attempt to impose order on an incomprehensible world. Similarly, in Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, meaning is deliberately withheld, forcing the audience to grapple with a story that refuses to resolve itself. Eco himself played with these ideas in The Name of the Rose, a novel that appears to be a straightforward detective story, but ultimately subverts the genre by questioning whether truth itself can ever be fully grasped. This view also has resonance in the field of artificial intelligence. AI models, like large language models or neural networks, operate not by uncovering objective truths, but by predicting patterns based on vast amounts of data. The results they generate are probabilistic rather than definitive, suggesting that, much like human cognition, machine intelligence does not discover truth so much as construct plausible interpretations. In this sense, AI mirrors the very enigma Eco describes, an endless interplay of signals, interpretations, and shifting contexts. What happens then if we treat AI outputs as authoritative rather than as the fluid, context-dependent approximations they are? The same mistake that humans have made with religion, philosophy, and science, mistaking a useful model for an absolute truth, could easily be repeated with artificial intelligence. But if the world is an enigma without a singular truth, what then is the role of meaning itself? Eco's statement does not reject meaning altogether. It merely cautions against the dangers of rigid interpretation. Perhaps meaning is not something we discover, but something we construct in conversation with the world. This aligns with existentialist thought, particularly that of Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, who argued that life has no inherent meaning except the one we choose to give it. Camus' concept of the absurd captures this tension. Humans search for meaning in a universe that offers none, and yet, rather than despair, Camus urges us to embrace the absurd and find joy in the act of creation itself. This shift from searching for objective truth to embracing subjective meaning has echoes in art, music, and storytelling. Abstract art, for example, resists a single interpretation, inviting viewers to project their own emotions and experiences onto it. Jazz, with its improvisational structure, thrives on unpredictability rather than strict adherence to composed order. Even mythology, long treated as a way to explain the world, can be understood not as a rigid system of truth, but as a fluid storytelling tradition that evolves with each retelling. Eco's insight is ultimately a call for intellectual humility and creative engagement. Instead of treating the world's enigma as a puzzle to be solved definitively, we might view it as an open-ended narrative, one in which multiple interpretations can coexist. This does not mean surrendering to relativism or denying the value of knowledge. Rather, it means acknowledging that even our most carefully constructed truths are provisional, subject to revision, and deeply influenced by perspective. Perhaps, then, the real danger is not in the enigma itself, but in the fear of admitting that we do not and cannot fully know. The challenge is to resist the human tendency to clutch at certainty, to allow for contradictions, and to cultivate the intellectual courage to live within mystery. In doing so, we transform the terrible into something profoundly liberating, the recognition that meaning is not a fixed destination, but an evolving journey. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Deeper Thinking podcast, an audio essay read by me, Holly, your digital narrator. To learn more about the subjects covered today, check out the links in the show notes. Until next time.